Zone focusing is a very handy skill to have. In fact, an essential skill, I would say, to have when you're out doing street photography. I use it about 85 to 90% of the time when I'm out doing street photography. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what it is, why I think you should use it too, and share my camera settings. When you zone focus, you switch your lens to manual setting or use a manual lens and preset your focal distance to create a zone where your photos will be in focus. Most modern lenses no longer have distance scales on the lens barrel because they're really designed to be used as autofocus lenses, optimized for the camera's autofocus tracking technology. The best solution is to buy a third-party manual focus lens because they do have distance markings on the barrel and they're very reasonably priced too. My Leica Q2 monochrome has markings and it's very easy to use. My modern Nikon lenses don't, so I use manual lenses from the 1970s. Zone focusing is determined by the focal length you use and the aperture you set. The wider the lens, the easier it is to zone focus. I think the seagulls are going to ruin my audio. Zone focusing is most commonly used in street photography where people are walking towards you or you're walking towards them, but you can shoot scenes like these fishing boats with zone focusing as well. It's nice to just point your camera and click and not worry about focusing.
First, let's assume we want to focus 10 feet in front of us. If you're using the very popular 50mm prime lens and want to shoot at f4, here's what you have to work with. Hardly any distance, which means you need to be confident where 10 feet actually is and be really quick to get that shot. If someone is walking fast, that's a challenge. If we go to f11, we have more distance to work with, but still, you need to develop some skills here to frame up a shot and grab it. Now let's switch to my favorite street and travel photography focal length, 28mm. If I shot at f4 with this lens, look at how much more distance I have to work with. Shooting at f11, I've got plenty of range and can get a sharp image from as close as 4 feet to infinity.
My preference is to focus at 6 feet normally, and I usually start shooting at about 10 feet. I try and shoot at f11 as much as possible. Sometimes that goes down to f8. 28mm, that's my lens choice. I don't have a choice with this little monochrome camera, it's a fixed lens, but with my Nikon system, I'll grab my 28mm vintage prime. When I am moving, or my subject's moving, walking towards me, like that lady there, I set my shutter speed to 1,000 or sometimes 2,000. If I can get away with it, I'll set it at 1/2,000th of a second. And I want to capture a sharp image, like that lady there. It's a rubbish photo, but it's in focus. A little bit early for champagne for me. Surprised it's not more windy right at the end of the arm here. Okay, it is windy up here, right on the end of the harbour arm. So you probably can't hear me, so I'm going to go back down and head into town where there are some people. Oh, Spitfire, is that? No. So all of my settings on this little camera anyway are completely manual. I don't worry about getting the perfect exposure. I tend to expose for the highlights. In fact, veer on the side of underexposed, because with this camera's sensor, I can be underexposed by 3 stops and pull it back to life and not have any issues with noise, even at slightly higher ISOs. And in fact, I've mentioned this before, the sensor on this particular camera looks more like film grain, the noise, and I like film grain. I like to push that and have a bit of contrast and grain. There are lots of websites with hyperfocal distance calculators on, and they all seem to vary slightly. So the best way, I think, to figure out this hyperfocal distance zone focusing is to spend half an hour in the garden with the camera and the lens that you're going to use, and figure out the distances and what works for you, and just get used to knowing what that predetermined distance that you're going to be focusing at is. As I said, I tend to focus at 6 feet, but 10 foot is that's a good distance. Right, it's getting blooming freezing. I'm going to head into town a little bit, I think, and see if we can find any people and have a little play. In case you're interested, today, because it's a little bit dull, a little bit overcast, I've got my aperture set to f8, my shutter speed to 1/1000th of a second, and my ISO is 3200. And as we go into the old high street here, it's going to be even darker, so I'll probably put it up to 6400 ISO. And as I said, manual. I'm obviously shooting raw files as well. I've decided to keep my ISO at 3200, and I put my aperture to f4 because I'm standing still and I'm pre-focused on a little sign here. So when people walk by and they're within a foot or so of that sign, I know that I'm going to get focus, even though it's a fairly narrow depth of field. It should be in focus. Good exercise. I think zone focusing is a really good skill to learn because it allows you to enjoy the experience of photography more. Not having to worry about focusing is pretty liberating. You can just concentrate on the composition and capturing a unique moment. And it's great. It also allows you to shoot from the hip and be very stealthy about your photography, which is obviously great for street photography. You can take photos without people even knowing you're doing that. But I think it's a little bit overused as well, this technique for street photography. There's too many people using it and shooting people walking towards them, and they're sort of pointless, boring photos. Nobody's doing anything interesting. There's no unique moment. It's just somebody walking. You've captured them, and you could argue that's documenting reality. And yeah, it is. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the fact that so many people do it. It just gets boring. I think I really like to try and find something interesting happening, and most of the time interesting things don't happen, so I end up walking around the streets for a few hours and come back with nothing, or certainly nothing that I would show anybody, and that's annoying. One of of my favourite street photos using zone focusing was actually taken where I've just been, in the old high street here in Folkestone. I was using all the settings that I mentioned in this video and just walking along, and these two guys were walking towards me. And the reason why I took that photo, and the reason why I love it so much, is because it's just unusual. It sort of begs the question, what's going on? There's a sort of a story there, or a potential story. And I don't know whether you agree, but the fact that the guys were carrying flowers and there was a little dress hanging from one guy, that was just, yeah, that was just different. It was interesting. But if they weren't carrying flowers or anything, there's just two guys walking, it's like, so what? Sun's going down. It's getting very cold. Thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting, and do leave comments and like and subscribe. Bye.